Hello everyone. So today we're going to go over how to run a chi-square test in Excel. In front of you, I've trimmed down a dataset that came from the Little Rock data portal. At the top you can see it's 311 service calls. The date when you download it all goes back to 2016. I mass downloaded just to have for other purposes. For this example, I already did tease out and filter out an October 2020 dataset only. And what I'm interested in with this example, how to run a chi-square, is the neighborhood districts or different wards and the issue type for 311 calls. So if you're familiar with Little Rock, you might already know these, but for those of you who are not familiar with Little Rock, the city is divided into 7 different wards. Obviously a bit larger than census block groups or tracts, but divides it into 7 different wards itself. So we're going to look at, are there differences in the 311 calls across these different wards? So we have 7 different wards, and we have a few different types of issues itself. So to understand that, keep in mind I've already trimmed this data set down. I've already taken out some other fields, variables, columns, just to streamline the example here today. Some of the ones I left were a unique ID, so the ID, the method, so how is received phone, app, generated by an officer, the date it was created, if it's open or closed, the date it was closed, if it is closed, the type of issue, and you can even get into subcategories of different issue types. I kept the word since we're interested in that, so we have categorical variables for the neighborhood district, as well as the issue type. So those are our 2 categorical measures that we're going to be looking to see if there is a difference in those based on the observed versus expected. And I did leave in the lat long for those of you who are interested in mapping it, visualizing it. It also had the address. I just went ahead and took out the address and left the lat long for that. All right. To start off with, I did put this in here just as a refresher for the chi-square statistic. The observed minus expected, you get the difference, you square the difference, and then divide by the expected for that. You sum all of those and you get a chi-square value across. In Excel, you don't need your critical value. It's going to test significance for you, but I did put this in here just an example of if you are looking for degrees of freedom, it is the number of rows minus 1 multiplied by the number of columns minus 1. So you can still use this to find your critical value and compare your obtained to critical to see if it's a significant difference in if you can reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis of equality, or in that case, independence. So for here, when you're looking at all of this, and you can see even for the month of October, there's quite a few different calls for 311 related ones. To make life easier, we want to summarize this into a table format that we can use as our observed. So for that, I'm going to highlight the whole table. So there I highlighted the top, then held Control Shift and hit the down arrow to select this entire month, so October. I'm going to insert, for those who are familiar with, a pivot table, if it comes over for me. And I'm going to put it into this existing worksheet already, so I'm just going to put it over here so we can see it within the same sheet itself. So once you insert a pivot table, it's going to ask you to generate your rows and columns. This is what we know already, that we are interested in the neighborhood district and the issue type. So for the district, I'm going to put it as the columns, and as the issue, I'm going to put it as the rows. You can see here that it's generated it, but it's missing a count, so it doesn't know how many are in each one. With that, I'm going to select the count ID. You can see it came over to the rows. I'm just going to move it over here to the sum values, and it already went to our count. So we know there's in Ward 1 a count of 68 animal service calls for the month of October in 2020. Also for chi-square, when you're calculating, you need to know the column totals and row totals and the overall total of 9,706. So here we can relabel this, and it's our observed. But what we're interested in now is understanding the expected. So we know all the values for observed, so we want to see the difference of expected. So an easy way to do this, you can highlight this table, copy it, and I'm just going to put it right below it. I'm going to do a paste special and only do the values. So it's going to get rid of the pivot table for this one, and it's only going to keep the values here. That's important for us, and I'm going to change this to expected. We don't need this anymore. We don't need the values within. Keep in mind, these are our observed values. we're now just interested in the expected and calculating the expected values itself. So once I clear those out, I can now go through and calculate the expected values. So with that, if you keep in mind when we're trying to look up our expected values, we're going to take our row total times column total and divide by the overall sample. So here, we're going to take our, either way you want to do this, row total times our column total and divide that by the 9706. So if you see this, and if you're familiar with Excel itself, you want to lock in a couple of these values itself so you can just copy and paste essentially this formula. So what I'm going to lock in here is, and if this helps you, I'm going to put in parentheses just so it's easier to follow. I'm going to lock in the column total of 2,640, and I'm also going to lock in the 9706 at the bottom, so that's going to stay the same as this formula is used down the column. So you see here that it generated 85, just over, if you're rounding 85 would be our expected. I'm going to move this down just for decimal place. So now we have animal services for Ward 1. What would be expected? Our observed versus expected. So with that, since we put it in, we can just grab that green square and pull it down. With that, now I'm going to replicate the same process for each ward. So here, again, it's going to be our row divided by, or multiplied, by our column total times the 9706, divided by the 9706. And with that, I'm going to lock in the column total and the overall sample total. So again, here we have 49. I'm going to pull this down. You can see these have different decimal places at the end. I'll clean it up so it's all consistent. Again, I'm going to do the same calculation. Row times column divided by sample size. Hit enter. Here again, remember, if I do not do this, it's not going to lock it in, and it's going to go down and expect values below it. So again, just filling those in, locking it in, and I'm going to repeat this process for 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to hit pause here so you don't have to watch it all, but continue that on your own. Alright, I went ahead and jumped forward, wrapped all of those calculations up. Again, I'm just going to highlight all these and make it a consistent denominator or decimal place here, so it has 2 for each. Now if you look, we have our observed values in the top, our expected values in the bottom. Below, I'm just going to put a P here and go to the next cell over. If you want to, you can make it right aligned to where it comes here. But now let's understand and identify if there is a significant difference in these two categorical measures. So the ward and the 311 call type. So we have animal services, code, parks and rec, public works, street science, trash, zoning, multiple types of 311 calls spread across 7 different wards. We want to understand if there is a significant difference in the 311 call type and the ward itself. Looking at it visually, we see differences within it already. What we're testing for is to see if our chi-square value, when it's looking at the difference between expected and observed, is significantly different. So for that, in Excel, we have a chi-square test. There's a few different ones based on what version of Excel you have. We're still just going to use a chi-square test itself. So as you start to type chi, you have the distribution come up. For it, we're just interested in running the test. So if I double click that, we have the test here. It wants the actual range, so our observed, and then our expected range. So I'm going to just simply highlight our actual range for all the words across 311 call types, comma, which now moves it to the expected range. And I'm going to do the same thing. Remember not to highlight the column or row totals. So now we have our observed and our expected. I hit enter. Now you might look at this and say, wow, what is this e to the negative 159, the exponent of 159? That's how many leading zeros there actually are there. So if you move the decimal place to the left, you would need to do that 159 times or 58. But if we change this to just a number here, It identifies it as such, and you can even move out the decimal places. So we do know that there is a significance here. Our obtained value is greater than our critical value. Excel does not provide our obtained value, but it gives the significance level. Was there a significant difference between the observed and expected for our chi-square, since we have categorical measures? With that, if you keep in mind how to calculate our degrees of freedom and our critical value, it's your number of rows minus 1 multiplied by the number of columns minus 1. This example, we just luck out there's 7 rows and 7 columns, so if we subtract 1 from each, it's 6 times 6, which is 36. If we want to come over to our critical value table, the highest one on this table itself is at 30, so we want to go over to 0.05 or even 0.1. We see our critical values here that we'd want an obtained value to be greater than to reject the null hypothesis. When rejecting the null hypothesis, we're saying that let me come back to our result itself, that the wards and the call type are independent. They're not dependent upon each other, so there's no relationship. When we find a significant one, we do say that they're dependent. There is a relationship between the two. So we know that there is a difference, a statistically significant difference in ward and call type. Keep in mind we have 7 of each, so you would have to do further analysis to pick apart which ones are significant if you want to get into a 2x2 type table and compare 2 wards and call types itself. But here we do see that there is a significant chi-square, so the expected versus observed is calculated, and we want to understand if there is a significance based on those 2 variables itself across these 7 little rock wards. So to summarize, we would identify, depending on what type of statement you want to make, but there is a significant difference among the call types, or the 311 call type, across the different wards in Little Rock. Remember, there's 7 different Little Rocks encompassing the entire city. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can always update the videos to include more or another example. Thanks.